Salve! Justin Slocum Bailey here from the Teach Human Latin Teacher Lab, which is a place with resources and training to simplify teachers' lives and help them grow as teachers, and through that to help Latin learners learn Latin joyfully and efficiently. Today we're talking about the concept of teaching Latin sentences, teaching sentences, which might seem like a colossally simple thing, and it actually is, as I'll show you, but it's not necessarily something that we Latin teachers always think of ourselves as doing. A lot of the time when we think of teaching languages or even how languages work, and classical languages in particular, we think vocab and grammar. You have the vocab and grammar, you put those two things together, and boom, you have language. Well, both from a linguistic perspective and from a teaching and learning perspective, that might not be the most useful way to think of language or to think of our task as language teachers. So I want to recommend to you the concept of thinking of yourself when you're helping people learn Latin, especially in the early levels, but really throughout their Latin learning careers, to think of yourself as someone who teaches Latin sentences. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that here in a moment. Let's actually use an example right off the bat. I'll write an example of a Latin sentence down here. By the way, one useful thing about thinking of yourself as teaching Latin sentences is that there are Latin sentences all over the place. Most curricula and textbooks feature Latin sentences, whether they're freestanding or in the context of a story or a poem or other text. You can easily make up a Latin sentence, either right off the top of your head or using information from students. The example that I'm going to give here is a sentence that I would have derived in Latin based on information collected from students. So here's the sentence. We'll say, Anna bene saltare potest. Anna bene saltare potest. Anna is able to dance well. Anna can dance well. Again, in my classes, often a sentence like this would be derived from something like asking students on their way in to write on a note card that I distribute, or on a post-it note, or on one of these lovely pieces of educational technology, these individual whiteboards, simply the answer to the question, what's something that you're good at? By the way, that tends to put people in a good mood too, thinking about things that they're good at. I would collect those, I'd look through them really quick, I'd pick one that seems easy to talk about in Latin, and I would write that sentence on the board. In this case, Anna bene saltare potest. Again, Anna can dance well. Anna is able to dance well. By the way, little pro tip, something I found useful is whenever possible, with long sentences, this tends to not be possible, but with short sentences like this, I like to write the sentence, the entire sentence, on the board in exactly one line. And I'll show you several things that makes possible. So Anna likes to dance, or excuse me, Anna is able, I'm getting ahead of myself, Anna is able to dance well. Now, why have this sentence? Well, first of all, I'm thinking of myself as teaching sentences because individual words are not enough. And in fact, a lot of what a word means is determined by, or at the very least affected by, what are other words around it in the sentence. So that's why not just words and not just endings. And on the other end, on the discourse level or the text level, a lot of times throwing that at students, a wall of text, for example, or even several several sentences strung together right off the bat can be overwhelming to students. So again, that's why I decided to come up with a sentence, in this case by asking students for their information. Now, what can I do with this? Why do I even have this up here? Well, if I want students to really get the hang of the language, both kind of for its own sake and for the sake of fluid, enjoyable, skillful reading of Latin texts, then I need to make sure that they are exposed to the language, to whatever features of the language, a lot, in context, and in a memorable way. I'll say that again, and I'll say it this time as if we Latin teachers want our students to really deeply get the hang of the language, to deeply internalize it, to have their brains actually change in the ways that constitute knowing Latin as opposed to not really knowing Latin, so that they can either enjoy it for its own sake or so that they can read Latin texts skillfully, joyfully, effectively, efficiently, then we need to expose them to the language a lot. We need to expose them to the language in context, that is, in the actual context of something being communicated, whether that's in writing, like in a text, or in speaking, and we need to communicate it with them, or expose them to it, I should say, in a memorable context. So that's what I'm going to accomplish in what I'm about to show you. So we have the sentence. Now, I want students to see and hear this sentence and also variations on it a lot. What thinking of myself as teaching sentences does for me, among other things, is that it reminds me that every sentence is made up sort of slots. And I'm purposely using the kind of lay term slots. In this case, we have 4 slots. There happens to be a slot for each word, but there are also other ways that we could think of this, right? So we could say, and by a slot, I mean, what's something that you could substitute something else into, right? So for the subject here, I could substitute other people's names. I could substitute any other noun, like Ursus, bene saltare potest, the bear can dance well. I could put in a pronoun, turn it into a question, right? Quis bene saltare potest. So all those things go in there. I'm actually going to help us remember that just by putting actual examples. So there could be other names. Let's say Silvia, that might be another person in the class. It could be nouns, Ursus or Ursa. And there could be whatever question word is associated with that slot. So in this case, quis. And lots of other things I could throw in there. By the way, one of the reasons why I like writing this out in sentences out in one line is that if I then come up with sentences like that with students or ask questions that elicit these other things, then I can easily write them underneath. I can also write above or below an English equivalent, if that's helpful, or whatever a shared language is at a place where I teach. Under bene, there could be lots of other things that go in that slot, right? There could be saipe, so other adverbs, basically. She often is able to dance. Non, she's not able to dance. That's not a true statement overall, although maybe there's a setting in which she can't. You could have other additional information in the slot, like hodie. That's again sort of it's again a temporal adverb, right? Hodie bene saltare potest. Hic, right here, she can dance well. Here, of course, you could have lots of different verbs, right? Cantare, dormire, you name it. Now, I want to emphasize here, for the purpose of this video, I'm just illustrating that there are lots and lots of variations on the sentence. I wouldn't be with students, except in maybe sort of a more linguistics focused class, pointing out these things as facts the way I'm pointing out in this video. I'll tell you after I write down some more of these examples exactly how I use a sentence in actual communication with students. And the last slot, of course, in order to put together this, to achieve this complementary infinitive, you can have things like potest, vult, amat. She wants to dance well. She likes to dance well. By the way, oftentimes this word amat with a verb in Latin has the added layer of meaning as well, that she actually regularly gets to do this or has a habit of doing that. You can also have something that's not quite the same format, but still works with a sentence, like dicitur. Dicitur. Anna is said to dance well, as in word on the street is Anna dances well. So all these things that can go in these slots. Now, why is that good to know? Well, because in order to expose students to the language, lots and lots and lots, in context and in memorable ways, what I want to do is I want students to hear this sentence, maybe use it themselves, but also build on it, react to things that are similar but not quite the same. So, for example, I can first, having just established this sentence by getting the information from students, in this case from Anna, write the sentence on the board and just ask some basic questions that would elicit this sentence itself. So, for example, sic an non, one of many ways of saying yes or no. Ita est an minime. Lots of ways of saying yes and no in Latin, as you may know, but I'm going to say sic an non. Anna bene saltare potest. Sic, ita est. Ita vero. However you and your students choose to say yes. I could ask questions about other slots, like Anna bene saltare potest? Anna bene saltare potest? An, that's the or word for an either or question, right? An bene cantare potest? Bene saltare potest? An bene cantare potest? Well, since this is a context of communication, I want to make sure that we're actually using real information. So if other students are unsure of whether Anna is able to sing well, I might ask, Anna, tu bene saltare potes? By the way, you might notice that what I did there is I varied the first slot, made it the pronoun tu, which also created a variation here, potes. If you're wondering, I've never had students have trouble with that. Like if they haven't yet been explicitly taught all the lines of a conjugated verb or anything like that, no problem. I teach them that tu is you. If students hear that it's potes, I just tell them that's what you say when you say you are able, right? So Anna, tu bene saltare potes. And maybe I'll point out that for clarity and accuracy that other forms of the same word might go in there depending on the situation. So tu bene saltare potes. Once again, let me be really clear. I'm not, for students, when I'm first introducing them to this and getting them lots of exposure, I'm not writing down all these words that are in red here. This is for you as a teacher and for me as a teacher to realize all the things that can go in these slots to give students vast exposure to the language. So remember, we asked the class, Anna bene saltare potest? An bene cantare potest? Okay, if we're not sure, I ask Anna, because we're now having a conversation. This is real communication, so it's language in context. Anna, tu bene saltare potes? Bene cantare potes? Maybe I'll add a quoque also. Bene cantare potes? Quoque? And she'll let me know. Let's say that she says no, she can't sing well. Then I'd say, omnes. I always repeat the information back to students, partly because they may not have heard it as clearly, partly because it probably didn't happen in a complete sentence necessarily in Anna's answer, because when people answer questions in any language, they rarely answer in complete sentences. But I want students to hear it. Remember, I want lots and lots and lots of in-context exposure. So I say, omnes. Omnes. Anna bene saltare potest. Non bene cantare potest. Bene saltare potest. Okay? Now just think, in my questioning of Anna, in my announcing the answer to students have now started to hear this sentence. And by this sentence, what I mean is, even that Anna bene cantare potest is kind of the same sentence in the sense of it has the same structure, it has the same types of slots. Anna bene saltare potest. By the way, you may have heard, I also varied it a little bit when I said that she can't. There are also these like invisible slots, right? I said Anna non bene cantare potest. So another cool thing, and we'll talk about this more in another video, but another cool thing is there are also these slots that are kind of empty in this version of the sentence. There's nothing there, but a non could go in there. A semper, Anna semper bene saltare potest. Anna hic. So a lot of these things could also go in that slot there. And you heard me do that when I said Anna non bene cantare potest. We'll talk lots more in upcoming videos about what thinking of teaching the Latin language as teaching Latin sentences can do for us. For now, I just want you to have in your mind, just want you to have seen, okay, any Latin sentence consists of slots like this that can be varied either in written examples that we provide students, in writing prompts that we give students, or writing tasks that we give students, or as I demonstrated here ever so briefly in some Latin Q&A, simple Latin Q&A that we do with students. And you don't need to be able to speak Latin really well on your feet to do that. You can have completely scripted out in advance that you're going to ask, that this is going to be, you're going to have so-and-so bene something potest, and you'll have a couple verbs ready to ask as alternatives and so on. You might have other things ready to ask in these slots if you want to ask for further confirmation and extend that conversation a bit more. One last thing that I want to point out about these slots is in this example, I underlined each individual word as a slot, but there are also cases where you might think of a slot as a multi-word slot. So, Anna bene saltare potest, Anna saipe dormire potest. Okay, they've varied this as kind of a chunk. And last but not least, you might actually think of it as the entire, what's sometimes called the predicate. The entire predicate is a slot. Anna bene saltare potest, Anna hodie dormire vult. And because those things both could be the case, both could be true, we might ask Anna, hey, are both these things true for you? I'm just pointing out that it's not always just an individual word that makes a slot in the sentence. Now, little note here really quickly to make it extra clear. It's not that I want students to think of Latin sentences as containing all these slots and want them consciously thinking about all these slots and what goes in and how they need to transform the words or how they would need to notice the transformation of the words. Doing that or operating on that awareness would actually make for very slow reading and nothing like the reading experience that a writer would assume the reader to have, right? So this is a tool for me as the teacher to construct sentences and to generate conversation and to ask questions. There may come a time, and depending on the goals of your class, you might point out to students how a longer sentence is put together, that really it consists of several shorter phrases, individual words, and so on. But in this example right here, and for the purpose of this video, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about myself, thinking of myself as teaching Latin sentences and helping students get the hang of the language in context through those Latin sentences. In other videos, we'll talk lots more about how to create variations of sentences like this. We'll talk about how to generate longer sentences from shorter sentences like this, because as you know, most sentences in Latin literary texts are much longer than this one. On that note, we'll also talk directly about applying this lens of thinking of ourselves as teaching Latin sentences to sentences that are contained in literary texts or are drawn from literary texts. And I'll also teach you much more explicitly the specific questioning techniques and Q&A techniques that I use with students to keep not just this one student, but all students involved, use multiple students' information, and as I've said now several times, gradually expose them lots and lots in context, in memorable ways to the Latin language. In the meantime, go ahead and explore the other videos on this channel and the resources linked in the description of each video. If you want there to be more resources like this, please do go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, like the video, leave a comment, and of course, share with your colleagues and friends. I'll see you next time.